This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Katelyn Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. Today, you'll meet Michelle Johnsrude.
Well, I am the granddaughter of dairy farmers from out here in BC. And by the time I was on the farm, the cows were gone, but there were dairy farms around us. My dog is here too. And my grandmother was really involved in gardening. And so there was a natural connection there, picking raspberries and strawberries with her early in the morning in summer, and her teaching us how to shell peas and those kinds of things. So I think the family connection was very strong, but we live in Chilliwack and it's a very agricultural area, and we know people who are farmers. So it sort of feels like agriculture and farming is part of who I am.
So I want to talk to you about, you were a teacher and you were teaching science and all of these things. What have been some of the biggest light bulb moments that you've been able to see with your students over the years when it comes to working in agriculture with them?
Well, I would say probably the biggest one, and this was probably right at the beginning of this program, was actually with my own daughter. She was going into kindergarten, and I remember sitting with her during her little kindergarten screening thing, and her future teacher said, "Now, Annika, where do apples come from?" And as a, agriculturally minded person, I thought, oh, this is her time to shine, my lovely daughter. And she looked at her teacher and she said, "The store?" And I thought, I have failed. I have failed as a mother and I have failed as a teacher. What am I even doing here? So that was that moment where I thought, even kids who grow up in families where, agriculture is talked about, we had a garden. Like, I grew carrots for her. She knew where those came from. But they just don't know where their food comes from. Like, do apples come from trees or do they come from bushes? They don't know. And so that was a huge light bulb moment for me where I thought, wow, if my kids don't know, there's got to be others.
Today, you'll meet Anna Bowen.
Hey, so I'm Anna Bowen, and I live in Wales in the UK. So it's a principality, it's part of the United Kingdom. So a lot of people around the world haven't heard of Wales, but it's a country to the west of England. There's about 3 million people living here, and it's pretty rural. And I am a dairy farmer, and I'm also a farm business consultant and a freelance writer. And my start in agriculture, I was born into it. So my father and brother now run the family dairy farm. And that's been in the family for about 100 years, or at least the dairy herd the farm's been around for longer than that. So I grew up on a farm, so it's kind of around animals my whole life. And then I went to agricultural college, went across to England to the Royal Agricultural College in Cirencester and did a couple of degrees there. But I kind of started my professional work in agriculture then as a teenager. I went to work for a local farm business consultant, started working with him when I was 14. So yeah, I've always kind of been around animals and then also around agriculture in that professional sense as well.
I'm curious, when you are consulting with farmers and whether, it's a sheep farmer, a dairy farmer, all of the things, through the variety of people that you meet with and connect with, how would you say, how progressive are the farmers that you are meeting with? I think that is probably the easiest way for me to ask you. How progressive are they? Are they doing it the same way that their grandfather did and their great-grandfather did? Or are people open to change? Are they open to new ideas?
There's a variety. So a lot of the farmers that I deal with would be really progressive. So we're mostly grass-based systems. So when it comes to technology, things are quite simple. So you're looking at fairly simple parlors, as little machinery as possible. So you wouldn't say I'm not dealing with cutting edge technology every day, but really progressive in terms of ideas, open to new suggestions, lots of sharing information within farmer groups, but also going to conferences, reading articles, learning, and always questioning what they're doing and trying to do better. The industry as a whole is really has that whole spectrum from people who are always trying the newest thing and always pushing themselves through to people who are, really traditional and running farms, very much like their grandfathers did. And obviously they've got tractors and there's a certain amount of computer work that has to be done now, whether you do it or whether you're getting somebody else to do that for you. But there would be some people who are really traditional. I wouldn't necessarily work with them day to day because they're not necessarily the sort of people that engage with consultancy. But I might go out and take some soil samples for a sheep farmer where it is, a really traditional hill farm in Wales where if you kind of take out the really obvious modern bits, a lot of what's going on is very similar to what was happening 50 years ago with breeds and management and stuff.
Today, you'll meet Rechelle Day.
My name is Rechelle Day. I live in Oregon. So I come from a family that's been farming for multiple generations. My grandparents did orchard crops. My father was a small farm in eastern Oregon, raising anything from watermelon to corn to wheat and mostly potatoes. And so I've always known agriculture, absolutely had a heart for it from the very beginning. It was those memories of going and getting fruit from my grandparents and walking around the neighborhood with our little wagon and distributing the fruit has really stuck with me even now into my journey with flowers.
Rechelle, what have been some of the biggest obstacles you've faced in the last 3 growing seasons that you've had?
Managing it all. Being an entrepreneur, like you mentioned, is a lot. You put a lot on your shoulders to not fail. And not just fail in starting a new business or starting crops. It's also like being a mom and a wife and a family member. There's a lot of hats that we wear as entrepreneurs, and we can't manage it all. I used to work in the, healthcare field. I got laid off, unfortunately, but it was kind of my jump start to really dive deep into my business. But even when I worked as, a healthcare executive, it was hard then to manage it all and feel good about I was succeeding in one of the areas. But now that I'm farming and doing the floristry, it's the same struggle of just trying not to fail at all of the jobs that I have and the hats that I wear. So I'm having to find balance all the time.
Today, you'll meet Laura Jane Beauville.
My name is Laura Jane Beauville. My husband and myself and our 4 kids moved out just north of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Well, this is our 5th growing season. I used to be a teacher. I left that, and now I am a farmer, and it's lovely. It's amazing.
So what were some of the pivotal moments for you and your husband and your family that decided that you no longer wanted to live in a city and you wanted to start a farm?
Right. So I can actually trace this back to one singular moment. And it's so funny. I love telling the story because it has literally informed the last 13 years of our lives. I was pregnant with my very first son. He was 13 as of this summer. So 13-ish years ago, I had left the house and my husband, bless his soul, cleaned the whole house top to bottom, amazing. And I came home and in this hormonal reaction, I walked in and the house smelled like Mr. Clean. And I had this millennial meltdown of, we're gonna poison our babies. And it was such a overwhelming, I have to change this. How are we not poisoning our babies? How can we do this? And so I literally made a commitment at that point. So I was pregnant with our first. We had just bought a home. We had both just graduated from university as educators. Neither of us had jobs, and we were pregnant, about to have a baby. So we were really poor, really broke. And I couldn't go out and just purchase all of the greener products. So I deep dove into research mode, and every single time I ran out of something in my house, I didn't just go buy what I had grown up with or what I had used before. I was like, okay, let me think about let's see if I can find something non-toxic to replace it, preferably DIY because that's cheaper. And so within a few years, we had switched over all the house products, and I went, oh, well, what about my makeup and our other stuff? Does that have chemicals and stuff in it? And so switched over all of our home care or our personal care. Yeah, personal care items and all of those things. And once I was done with that, I was like, well, our food has stuff in it too. And I dove into researching that. And that was kind of what kickstarted this. I had always gardened. Once we had a home, I started gardening, but I kind of went into overdrive and I was like, well, I have to grow all of our food. And we lived in the city and we had a very small lot, and I converted my whole backyard into garden. I had my front landscaped with edible landscaping. And the only thing I was able to do was grow enough tomatoes for us. I didn't buy tomato products at the store. And I was like, this is great. This is awesome. How do I do more?
Today, you'll meet Laurel Ysebaert.
Well, my name is Laurel Ysebaert. I am a first-generation cattle rancher in southwestern Ontario. Basically, I grew up on the farm that I am on now. And I was always the gal that was like, get me the heck out of here. And I'm moving away and never coming back. So I moved to Alberta. And then my dad decided to sell the family farm. And so we couldn't pass that up. So we're back here. And then we had a couple kids. And then we were like, we should be doing something with this slice of land. And it was always farmed for cash crop. But we decided we had this crazy idea we should just get a couple cows and raise our own cows for beef for our family, be a little more sustainable. And then that's basically where everything went a little squirrely Dan, because then I got more cows and then I got chickens and then like ponies and a donkey. And then I built a farm store. Wait, I went on Instagram first at some point before that, and then built a farm store, and then started also a podcast.
So you started this operation on your family operation. What does your family have to say about the growth of this operation from where it started when you and Andy moved back to where it is now?
You know what? We haven't really done a check-in with Grandpa Shane, my dad, in a bit, but I feel like in general, so before, like I said, I grew up on this farm, and before me, well, my parents, and then before them, my dad's parents, initially, like they bought this farm originally. So that's why I say like, I'm on a first generation cattle rancher on a third generation family farm, because we didn't have cattle before. Anyway, so I think for my dad, he's a little more in tune and aware of the changes and whatever, because he spent a large portion of his younger life here. And to see like what we have done with it, I think he is pretty, I would say, blown away or proud, because, you know, I think my grandparents would be really stoked to see that we've kind of brought it back to sort of what they had it as. Like they had horses and whatever, goats. I need goats, by the way. We'll talk later. But yeah, I think for them, you know what? I don't even know how to answer this, because it's hard, because I think other people in our family never really understood what we were doing, if that makes sense. So people in my family that are more involved or aware of ag in general, it's more like, oh yeah, cool. Other people are just bit and they don't understand it.
You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/the Rural Woman podcast. Today, you'll meet Kylie Gray-Eilers.
So for those who are not familiar with me or just tuning in today, my name is Kylie Gray-Eilers. I'm the owner here at Grey Girl Farms. I grew up a fourth generation farm girl, and my family has been involved in agriculture for over 100 years, something I find really amazing and really passionate about. I didn't have the opportunity to farm with my family. My dad retired when I was in high school from farming. And then I always have known that I wanted to work in agriculture. And so I've worked in agriculture all my life.
Kylie, what advice do you have for anyone who is looking to start, whether that's just growing a flower for themselves or all the way up to they want to start their own flower farm?
Yeah, that's great. I think that my best advice is to just start. I think we get so fixated on having the perfect plan, having everything lined up so it's exactly having everything just perfect. If you want to start a garden, just go buy one tuber and one flower pot and some potted soil and just plant it and move on. It doesn't have to be a perfect Instagram worthy garden. It doesn't have to be anything other than what you can get done and what's obtainable. to provide you the fulfillment of what those flowers are going to bring. It's really very simple. I have lots of people say, oh, well, I need to get raised garden beds. Oh, well, I need to get this. That's great. I would love raised garden beds too. But my honey-do list for my husband is very long, and that doesn't hit the high one for me. So I tell people that a lot. Just start. If you are wanting to start a business, whether it's growing flowers, whatever your business is I think that you just have to be willing to start. It's the same advice, but in a different way. Is what I've learned about business, and it's not just in my flower business, it's in anything that we do, is that you can always reevaluate, and we are constantly reevaluating. What works for me today did not work 3 years ago. What works for me today or what worked 2 weeks ago doesn't work today. And you have to be willing to have an open mind and just be constantly changing and evolving, and realize that you have time to change what you're doing, and that's okay. It's like if you launch something and it works, great. If you launch something and it doesn't work, that's okay too.
Today, you'll meet Janis Harris.
So I'm Janis Harris, and I live in St. Thomas, Ontario. And my parents had organic vegetables, and they grew that for my whole childhood. They were kind of the ones who quit their government job and started growing vegetables. And so growing up on the vegetable farm, I helped out and I was always there, but I never wanted to be a farmer. I was always like, nope, I'm going to get a real job. And I'm going to go to school and all that. And so I went to school to be an optician, and I did that for about 10 or 15 years. I was working as an optician. And then I met my husband, who grew up on a calf farm. And I don't know, I guess I wanted to prove that I was still a little bit of farm girl or something. And I wanted something to do after work. So I started growing flowers to sell at the farmer's market, because my parents were still going to the farmer's market in St. Thomas. And I grew that summer 3,000 gladiolus, so not small or anything. And then just kept going from there and adding more and more flowers every year. And that was 15 years ago. And now this is my full-time job. I quit my optician job 3 years ago, and I've been doing flower farming full-time.
So you do quite a bit with your local community when it comes to flowers. So tell us about how you engage with your local community to share your love of flowers.
Yeah, I think the one that we have the most fun at, and it's fresh in my mind too, because we just had one of our sessions this week, but we go to a couple of the different nursing homes in the area. And one of them has had us sign up for the whole year, and we go once a month. And we take buckets of the flowers that are blooming, and we do design workshop with the residents. So it's so fun to go in there, and when we were there with the tulips, they were all just hungry for anything alive because it had been snowing for so long. And then when we went with the peony, we're talking about all the different ones that they had in their gardens and what colors they had and what the ones they like and all the darn ants that get on them and that. So it was really a good conversation with them about that. And one lady, she was like, one of the first times we went, she's like, well, I used to do the church flowers. Every Sunday I used to have to do 2 arrangements for the church. So she was really proud of that. So it's really just neat getting them talking about that. The one, she has a little balcony apartment in the nursing home, and she always makes me come over and see the planters that her son has brought her with all the different petunias and coleus and different planter flowers growing there, but she always wants me to go and see them and tells me how he started all the seeds and he's growing them for her and that. So that's really fun.
Today, you'll meet Melody Garner-Skiba.
For those of you that don't know me, I am a rancher down in southern Alberta. I'm tucked right by Waterton Lakes National Park. And I actually like to say I'm a third generation business owner who happens to operate a ranch. And our ranch focuses on horse breeding. And we now have some equine tourism, equine education. And so our journey here at Rocking Heart Ranch really started back in 1986. We ran a mixed farming operation in Saskatchewan. So my start in agriculture really began being at the knee of my dad and my mom, riding horses, feeding cattle, taking my naps in the big old case tractor as we were harvesting. And we moved to southern Alberta when I was 9. Our family at that point, Saskatchewan, didn't have a real great future. So my parents up and moved us, and we looked at every ranch from basically Edmonton south. We drove into this little slice of heaven here, and the story continued from there. I have to say the reason why I'm in agriculture today is very much because I saw my mom, who worked off the farm and on the farm, and my dad, who was probably one of the biggest influential factors in my life, and said, you know what, kiddo, you can do anything you want to do. And he never treated me like a girl that was just supposed to be in the kitchen learning how to cook. I was his right-hand man for years because my brothers are quite a few years older than me. So, you know, I was the one out fencing with him, calving, pulling calves, all of that stuff. And so to me, that's really where I got my start, was on our family ranch.
So you had mentioned earlier that you went away to university. You had careers off of the ranch. What essentially made you decide that going back to the ranch full time was what you wanted to do?
I was told at 18, and all of us kids were told this. Before you come back, my father sat us down and he said, before you come back to the ranch full time, you have to go and build a life outside the ranch. You go build and show that you can build a life off the ranch before you come back. I knew in my heart I was always coming home. It was just a matter of when I was coming home. So at that point, when I graduated from university, I thought to myself, I am going to take a bunch of different careers and I'm going to learn a bunch of transferable skills that I'm going to be able to bring back to the ranch and help it succeed. Because, you know, at that point, I graduated university in 2000, right? The world has changed. But for me, transferable skills in all of the different industries I've worked with in the background, I have been able to bring all of those skills back to the ranch. So again, I knew I was coming home. I would have liked to come home sooner, but to be quite candid, it just, growing up here, there's not as many advantages. And I think a lot of rural women face this. We're not close to a city. So with my kids, it was a matter of, you know, they wanted to play soccer. They wanted to have some access to some additional, you know, opportunities. So we split our time. We lived in Coaldale, and, you know, I always say we lived in Coaldale Monday through Thursday and on the ranch Friday through Sunday. So once our youngest graduated, and then with my dad and the fire and the whole transition thing, it was like, okay, this is the time. Not gonna lie, scared shitless. Like, that was a big jump to go and say, okay, we are like leaving and we are coming here. And I have a dream, I have a vision. We're just gonna say, let's make it happen. And I don't know how many people I've had tell me, and people that are close to me that have said, you'll never make it go of it. You will fail. You will. And I'm like, that just, I guess I'm that person. And Katelyn, it sounds like you are too. I'm like, you tell me I can't do something? Well, screw you. I'm going there and I'm going to prove you wrong.
Today, you'll meet Noel Cole.
So I am Noel. I reside in southeast Idaho in the high country. I come from a ranching family. So as a young girl, I rode horses and moved cows. And I don't know, when I was around maybe 8 or 9, my parents decided kind of to get out of ranching. So we left that lifestyle. And fast forward a little bit, I ended up marrying a 4th generation farmer, and we went off to school, and the farm kind of kept pulling him back, and it kept pulling me back as well. And we ended up coming back to his family operation. However, there wasn't really enough ground, I guess you could put it that way, to support 2 families. So we kind of branched out and started our own little operation, and he would work for his parents in exchange for equipment. And we just kind of made it work for a little while. And eventually we were able to grow our operation through purchasing a small amount of land. And then we've picked up some leases. And eventually it got too complicated to where we were, having a load of fertilizer come in, and his parents were having a load of fertilizer, and trying to separate everything out and knowing whose is whose and who's paying for this. And it just became too much. So we formed a partnership together. So now it's my husband, myself, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law. And then we have 2 young sons that tag along with us. Our main crops are hard red spring wheat, malt barley, and we have a few oilseed rotations as well.
So, and on top of being a farmer and a mom to 2 littles, you're also an insurance agent. So tell me about that and what that was like on wearing that hat, knowing that there was a bunch of folks who couldn't get in their fields.
Yes, I really enjoy being a crop insurance agent because I get to connect with other farmers. It's a little bit different for me because I'm out here and I know kind of what the conditions are and what they're facing. So I can kind of relate to what's happening and make the call and say, hey, I know that we're not going to be able to get in the fields. This is what, we need to, document so that you are covered and protected. And it's stressful because I just want them to be successful and I want to protect their operations. And it just weighs on me because I know how important it can be and how much impact it can have on their operation, especially in a bad year where there's, preventive planning issues, or if it's a drought or something like that. I just know how crucial it is for them. And crop insurance there's a lot of detail to it, and getting all of those details right. Sometimes I lay in bed at night and, the things start popping in my head. Okay, well, did that get done? Did this get done? And yeah, it can be stressful.
Today, you'll meet Lauren Van Ewyk.
I was a little girl, grew up on a small farm, and I used to love to walk my sheep down the road, and it caused all sorts of people to stop and ask if they could pet my sheep. So my start in agriculture, my love for livestock and my love for the land began very early. And then I met and married my husband, who was from Prince Edward Island, and his dad worked on potato farm. And so I got to learn all sorts about potato industry on Prince Edward Island. And then we settled in southwestern Ontario, and we have a sheep farm here, and we have an on-farm bakery and a few other value-added products. So that's kind of, in a really small nutshell, my introduction to agriculture.
So not only are you a farmer, you have a very important off-farm job. So tell us more about what you do to fill your day.
So I am a registered social worker in the province of Ontario, and I have a master's in mental health counseling. I'm actually a PhD student at the University of Guelph right now. And I have the absolute privilege of walking with farmers when the walking's tough. And so I have had numerous times where I have been able to kind of help people when they're struggling in an industry where we're not always really good about articulating we need some support. In our industry, we're really good to ask our fellow farmers if we need help with a sprayer or we need help with equipment repair, but we're not always so good when we need help from an emotional standpoint, or when we're feeling kind of stuck. And so, the term mental health would probably be plastered across with my name, but it's really about helping one another kind of find the rhythm again that makes farming and agriculture in general, that sustenance of life. So that's where myself and a couple of other social workers got together, and we formed a company called the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance. And so we work with clinicians all across Canada, some in the United States. We even have one in the UK now who have taken appropriate training and have lived farm experience, so that we can make sure that farmers are really getting the support that they need. Some of the most critical research that's been done by Katelyn out of Australia, and some more local here at University of Guelph, Dr. Leith Deacon and Dr. Andrew Jones-Bitten and her team, really centers on the fact that there's barriers for farmers to access support. And so our goal is to help reduce those barriers and make sure that people are able to speak farmer, for lack of a better term. I'm actually coming out to Alberta in April to speak with a group of physicians about, how do you incorporate kind of the language of agriculture, and how do you ensure that you're actually able to meet those needs and pick up on those pieces when farmers are struggling.
For sure.
And so that's my off-farm job, which is actually, it's incredible. It's such a privilege to hear those stories.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at the Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.